So we have to have our own narrative of what history has been and what history is and what history can be used for. As Dr. Clark, our great scholar, said it best, history can be our clock to tell us where we come from, what time it is, and where we need to go. History can be a compass for us to let us know what we have to do and what we haven't done, so that we have to make sure that we don't build our narrative of socialization, how we get our values, and acculturation, how we fit into society, based upon the lies of European superiority and African inferiority. But we have to understand that we have suffered through a process of dehumanization, but our resilience and our strength has allowed us to rise. And we can say, as Maya Angelou said, "And still I rise." And African symbols of rebirth and resurrection, even after death and destruction, show that the Africans built into their culture a consciousness that out of death and destruction can come new life. And this is what is the lesson of HAPI, that there is resilience in the ecological systems of the earth, there's resilience in the human family on earth, and there's resilience in the mysteries of the universe, in the divine order of the universe that is not fully understood. But it all represents a chance to bring out of death and destruction new life, and to do as the Africans understood they were doing, build for eternity.
Hey, happy Wednesday, everybody. I just want to welcome you to another Happy Talks. It's very exciting. But before we get started, there's just a couple of things we wanted to let everybody know. So number one, and for those of you that know this information, that's cool. But believe it or not, there's some people who don't know that we actually have a documentary out. It was released on July 18th, and we had a very beautiful online presentation of it, and we've had some screenings thus far. So this is the thing, our screenings are online, and as much as we have to use, as Professor Small says, our ecology, use what we have to make it work, there is still a huge part of us not feeling like we're connecting with our audience, because this film was made in love to exchange love, and we've gotten a lot of response in terms of the film and what it's doing for people. But we will be going on a theatrical run as soon as COVID will allow. So if you are in a city and you want us to come to your city, if you could please email us at hapifilm.com. hapifilm@gmail.com. And with the name of the city and possibly like theater leads, so that we can get that going. Initially, we were supposed to open up at the Schomburg here in Harlem, but because of COVID-19, that didn't happen. So that's why we've been doing the online platforms. But there's still a lot missing, and we're missing seeing you guys just as much as you guys are missing missing seeing us. So please, again, hapifilm@gmail.com. We have so many happy this, I always get them confused, but it's hapifilm@gmail.com. You send us your city, and if you have any theater leads. Okay, so the other thing, everyone's talking about joining the Hoppy movement. And what is the movement? How do I join? All right, so it's a couple of things. So one, you got to look at the movie. Now, we have lots of ways that you can see this movie. You can see it when we do our online screening for now. And the benefit of doing the online screening, it's cool because we have like a private Zoom meeting with everyone afterwards with cast members. And so like the last one was really nice. We had Dr. Georgina Falou on there, Dr. Jeffries, both Dr. Jeffries actually. Asar Imhotep. So this is it's really a good time for you to get your questions answered, because after you see the film, there's a lot to see. It's a lot to digest, and it's good to be around some other people to ask questions and to get whatever emotion you have going on like off your chest. And so that's the benefit of watching it, online with us. Now, if you don't want to watch us online with us, that's fine. You can go to we have the video on demand, and it was streaming and a digital download, and you can go to the it's our Vimeo account, and I'm going to put that up there so that everybody can see that. You can go to our Vimeo, and there's the link for the Vimeo, and you can download a digital copy. And we just ask again, just send us an email and and tell us your thoughts, and or just whatever you're feeling about the film. But that's the Vimeo download. Now, if you're old school, and a lot of us are old school, I'm old school. I still have my DVD player. Just go on to hapifilm.com and you can get your DVD. Now, the cool thing about hapifilm.com is that you can not only get your DVD, but you can also get Hoppy gear. We have t-shirts. We have some autographed posters of our movie poster, and we have all the DVDs. So not only can you get Hoppy right there, you can also get Taki Grant's first two films, Nubia, okay, and The Tekken, okay. These are really good films. We a lot of since we've been doing these interviews, we've really figured out that Hoppy is actually like part of a trilogy. Okay, so it's really nice. You should see the first two ones, and we have a nice bundle deal. It's really nice. So we have those. You can get all that stuff on hapifilm.com, and plus you can see and read about all the different cast members we have, as well as a little bit about what Hoppy is, because it's more than just a film. It is a movement. So how do you get how are you part of the movement? So the movement consists of, and I'm gonna put these up for you guys to look at, okay, as we're just going over it real fast. So the Hoppy movement, there's a lot of things that we want people to take from the movie, but these are the three that we're going to start off with. First, pledge to support Black businesses. Very important. And even Black businesses need to support other Black businesses. Okay. And then we are hoping that you will pledge to just become more financially literate. Just read more about money and how money works. But don't worry, we're going to have some stuff coming down the pike, to help you with that area. And then the last one, pledge, is to teach the youth the truth. That's very, very important. So support Black businesses, become more financially literate, and teach the youth the truth. The other piece in how you become part of the movement is to join, send us an email if you go to hapifilm.com and sign up for our newsletter. The newsletter is nice. We have two kids that are actually working on it. They do some articles on there, but we talk about a financial innovator from back in the day whose shoulders we're standing up on right now. We also give some Hoppy news. We talk about some health issues, and we also, give some financial tidbit information. So it's very important for you to sign up for the newsletter. All right. And the last thing about, becoming part of the movement is that little yellow form I just, that I just saw about, that you just, if I can talk, if the yellow form that you just saw on the screen. When you see a screening, I email that to you. So we just ask that you post it so that everybody can see that you joined the movement. That's super, super duper important. But other than that, it's very important that, all the people, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts that are really supporting us in a real way. We think about when we started this journey, we had, I think, maybe 400 YouTube subscribers, and now we're almost up to 5,000. So please subscribe. And we know that a lot of people see our interview. Like last week, we had a really good turnout. I think Dr. Rashidi Renoko was maybe up to 27,000 views, and not that many subscribers. So we know you guys are looking at those videos. So just go ahead and hit the subscribe button. The subscribe button is going to allow us to, bring more programming to you. So enough about Hoppy. One more thing. Hoppy, the next screening is October 3rd. So remember, if you want to be part of the after party panel mix, then you have to get a screening ticket, and you go to hapifilm.com and pick up your ticket. All right. So without further ado, okay, we're going to start with our panel. This is going to be great because we have a person that's really new to Hoppy Talks. And the other piece is that when you're looking at these Hoppy Talks, it's a really good idea to have seen the movie first. So then you know how all of this fits in. So it's all one like circle of love. Okay, watch the movie, look at these Happy Talks. All right. So our first person is very new to our platform. No one's seen him on Happy Talks yet. And so I'm so excited to introduce you guys to Professor Hunter Adams.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Felicia. So great to be invited here. And I give a shout out to all the people who are watching live, wherever they may be in the world. A little bit about me. I'm a Chicago native, Windy City native, South Side. I'm a father of 3 amazing children. My son is an insurance broker. My oldest daughter teaches at the elementary school that I went to as a child, Ruggles. And my youngest daughter, well, she's really a grown woman, but she is a cardiothoracic surgeon at a hospital in Ann Arbor, and she directs that department. Wow. So our parenting, our African-centered parenting skills worked for our children. A little bit more about me, the science. I worked at a Department of Energy lab in the 1970s through the 1990s at a particle accelerator. And anyone who doesn't know about that, you may have heard about the accelerator at CERN or Fermilab, searching for the God particle, as they call it, as to what makes, our universe, what it is. Mm-hmm. I've had a long-term interest in science all my life. It's important to say that my parents stimulated my curiosity by buying me physics sets, chemistry sets, erector sets. That's before Legos now.
Oh, wow. Yes.
And I watched Mr. Wizard, and I never had a sense that I was inferior. I always saw myself as being a part of that. And so I did. But aside from the science, I've been an advocate for science education for our youth. I participated in the 90s in a number of STEM programs of organizations like SECME and NAACP ATSO project. I worked with Dr. James Comer and developed something for the helped co-develop something for the National Urban Coalition called Say Yes to a Youngster's Future. It was used in a lot of cities. One of the things that, I'm proud of is that after the Black community in Portland sued, this was in the 80s, sued the Portland, Oregon school district to desegregate and decolonize the curriculum. And they won that lawsuit. And one of the things that happened was that the Portland, Oregon School Board commissioned Dr. Asar Hilliard, a dearly beloved friend and colleague, peace be with him, to come up with a plan on how to do that. And so Dr. Hilliard came up with the idea of having baseline essays, resource documents that the teachers could infuse African content into the curriculum. And so Dr. John Henry Clark wrote the history curriculum. There was 6 sections, history, social science, math, science, art, and music. And I wrote the one on science, African contributions to science. And I have to say that it was so disruptive, it challenged the current counterfeit narrative, as I call it.
I like that, counterfeit.
It was a counterfeit, as Dr. Rosalind Jeffries said in the trailer, right? We've been subject to a counterfeit narrative for hundreds of years. And I found myself on the front page of the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, and then the attacks began because this disrupted the whole American pedagogy on all aspects of the curriculum, because, there's a book called The Lies My Teacher Told Me. Yeah. Well, actually, it could be called The Lies My Teacher Was Taught, who taught me.
Yes.
And so that whole thing blew up around the country, but then came budget cuts and because it was disrupting everything, because suddenly Africans in America found themselves in history, in science and music and art and social science and mathematics. And that wasn't the case because the history books have been telling us a counterfeit narrative for so long. And so that led to further things down the road that we did. I was a consultant to the landmark Chicago Field Museum of Natural History Africa exhibit. It's a permanent exhibit. I encourage anyone in the audience, when you're in Chicago, when it's safe to visit, of course, to see the exhibit, because it takes people on a tour of African lifeways that, again, debunks the narrative that Africans never did nothing, never contributed anything, so forth and so on. And the Chicago public school system has adopted, I helped to develop their interdisciplinary African-American curriculum. Just a couple other things, since you got two people here. Because
plus we got a lot of questions. Got a lot of questions, Professor Adams.
One of the things that from my days at the accelerator and studying with Dr. Bobby E. Wright, I think one of the greatest minds, clinical psychologists that I know of, he taught me to think about your mind, right? Along with late musician Phil Curran, that you have to learn how your mind works. And so I developed in the late 80s a nonlinear physics theory on how our brain functions. And I presented this based on something that people are familiar with, tsunamis, also called soliton waves. And so I presented that at the National Society of Black Physicists, Black Chemists. Most recently, now 9 years ago, I presented that idea at a conference in Stockholm, Sweden, University of Stockholm. So I'm trying to work to figure out how our minds work so we can rescue our captive minds, because our minds, Felicia, are captured.
Yes.
We believe these lies that we've been told, and it becomes embedded in our biology, and we end up passing that information to our children and in the future generations. So, yes, I've done lectures in African countries, South America, all around this country. I worked with Dr. Ivan Van Sertima as one of the co-founders of his journal.
Wait. Nope, can't say that yet. That's a question. So
okay.
Say it right now. Let me bring on the other two guests.
Okay.
And then
the last thing I'll say, I have a book coming out that's going to be extremely disruptive next year called We Were Never Slaves.
Oh, you got to come back.
We were never slaves. We have to stop. We have to stop using that term to describe our ancestors. They were not slaves. They were hostages.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. We have to stop saying transatlantic slave trade too. It was transatlantic human trafficking. It was crime against humanity. And so that's part of changing this counterfeit adverse narrative into a narrative of truth and facts.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Wait, hold tight. All right. I'm going to bring in now. This is the other Dr. J. This is Miss Dr. Is it? I guess it's Miss Dr. Rosalind Jeffries. How you doing?
Okay. Okay. Greetings. I'm doing fine. I've been called many kinds of things, Mrs., Miss, and African names, and I've been called sister, and I've been a Pokua. I've been called grandmother. Before my time, when I was young, I was called grandmother, mother, and so various titles. But I am married to Dr. Leonard Jeffries. My professional training is in art history. I got a PhD earned PhD, not just donated, but from Yale University in the History of Art department, so that my training was art around the world. George Kubler with the art of South America, and then those that had to do with European art at the various phases and periods. And but mostly I was interested in African art. But you couldn't do African American, but you could do Africa and America, and then find your own way into African American. And then so after I was able to use my PhD to get a job at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the prestigious giant operation that was there. I worked in what was called the Department of Primitive Art, which was the Rockefeller Old Collection. Part of it was. And the material and data that was collected over the years before at the Museum of Primitive Art that was on down near MoMA, Museum of Modern Art. So that my job at the Metropolitan was also to create exhibitions. I would go into stacks and create an exhibition. I also worked through community education, which I was to take the art and symbols and signs and power forms, etc., to the prisons. There was a prison art program. Then also there was an art program with young pregnant girls still pulled out of the public schools and sent into a safe house on Western Avenue around the 80s. And my job was to go through with them through their pregnancy and inspire them. And so they wanted me to do it through the holdings and museums, but through culture, so that these girls would come out with a sense of understanding themselves within world culture. Very key to my life, of course, I've taught at various colleges in New York and New Jersey, but key to my life is the wife of Dr. Leonard Jeffries. I taught at City College, but also at NYU and Montclair State College as a guest and a special Schomburg lecturer at Ramapo State College, and so that people would hear about me and want me to come to various institutions. But working with Black Studies itself was key, because I had a chance to work in the field of art with various people that was in Leonard's department. That was very important. One of the persons was Tao Ogunade, who developed the Festac 77, part of the executives to do that entire international conference. Also key to Black Studies was Isaac Akinjobin, who was part of the interchange program of students in America going to the Yoruba, Ife, Benin kingdoms, and him coming to America even staying at our house with his wife and his children. That was very, very important because I had a chance to really get deeply into some of the things in Ife, the culture, knowing the objects that was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art when they had the treasures of ancient Nigeria. Here it is. I had the living mayor of Ife, and who was a professor and also author, writing about the history of the Yoruba people. And then through Crossroads Africa, Dr. James Robinson was key because he gave me my introduction to Africa, which was back in 1960, before a lot of the scholars were into things. I was in Nigeria, way up country, had a chance to go to all three of the regions, but mainly amongst the Igbo people. So became important to me was Gabriel Oyibo, Dr. Oyibo, because he was from that same area where I had spent some time, and I could ask him key questions about things in the art world. And then also we had Dr. Richard Nunu. And Dr. Richard Nunu was the head of museums and monuments, the main museum in Accra that most visitors come to visit. Here he was in America as we were the hosts. And while he was here, since he was an archaeologist, he went up into Plymouth, Massachusetts, and up in those areas discovered that there were Africans in Plymouth Rock, in the early development of America. Dick Gregory was in the area too, and so he wanted to be a part of the whole project, and so he would come, and all of that's part of my art dealings. And then, of course, in living in Ivory Coast, 1965, 1966, traveling to the other countries from Ivory Coast, but a key there was Nyangara, who was the head of the linguistic department, and he was able to help us a great deal. And so too with Leonard's background in Black studies and people constantly contacting him all around the world. Even to this day, he gets calls in the middle of the night where it's still light in these people's countries. And so too, these are people that are asking about me and the projects and works that I am doing. I was born and raised in Harlem, and just to end briefly with this, I'll say I was born and raised in Harlem. So therefore, I have that history of African Americans in me, the history of us, not just Africa, but I grew up on 115th Street, which at the corner is where Malcolm X was. And so I heard him in person lecturing practically every Saturday. And at the same time, I would leave that and I would go with my cousins who were opera singers downtown to hear the opera. So I had a wide range between the classical, the opera, the Renaissance. I was, from my family, we were Northerners. We were not Southerners. My parents were Southerners. So they came up Booker T. Washington. We came up W.B. Du Bois, talented 10th. So at a certain age as a child, I played Claude Debussy, on the piano in town hall. So that talented 10th was in me, and that was some of my integration into the things that had to do with the arts.
Okay, wow. Okay, you know what? Look, these bios are like a whole show. You guys have such rich lives, such rich lives. All right. So our last guest, this is this guy, let me tell you, he rolls with us all the time. We can call this brother like 5 minutes before a panel, like, listen, is there any way? Yes, send me the link. So we always love that. And just another note, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries is also a HAPI cast member as well from the film. And this is another HAPI cast member, Asar Imhotep. How you doing? Oh, you're muted.
Peace and blessings. I apologize. I appreciate you having me on this prestigious panel. And, I won't go through my whole life. It's not that interesting. But I am a software developer and Africologist, one of the co-founders of Black Science Month, which is October, which is coming soon for those who want to know the details. My concentration is the relationship between ancient Nile Valley civilizations and modern Bantu cultures, languages, philosophies, and religions, and the like. And so one of my major tools that I like to use is, of course, linguistics, and trying to tie and show in a deep way in the continuation of Professor Shekinah Diop, the underlying cultural unity, of Africa, to find solutions to modern problems, grounding us in our ancient traditions. So that's all I have to say about that.
We have a bunch of smart people up on this panel today. That's what's up. All right, so let's just get started. So, who were the Dogon people, and what is their origin? We'll start with you, Professor Adam.
The Dogon currently live in somewhat of a very inhospitable, hard to assess place called the Bandiagara Cliffs or Plateau in the West African nation of Mali. They've been there for some time. As to their origins, that's complicated, and there's conflicting narratives on their origins. There have been some people who have claimed that they fled they fled the Nile Valley after the last after the Arab invasion and takeover and colonization of what now is called Egypt, but at that time it was Kemet and so forth. But then there's others that say that they're related to the Toloi people of the 2nd through the 7th centuries, that those people occupied that same area, and that the Dogon, they didn't replace them, but there was another group called the Telem, and there's not a lot known about the Telem. But because of fragmented geological and archaeological evidence, it's still kind of hard to say exactly where they originated from. But one thing is for sure, that those Bandiagara cliffs act as a zone of protection, because they were kind of driven there by Muslims who wanted to convert them, but they resisted and fought, and so they're still there today. So there's a continuous history of those areas being occupied by a number of different African people, going back to the 2nd century AD, usually. One of the complicating factors in that is that African people migrate, right? And when we look at the travels during the 14th century during the Mali Empire of Mansa Musa, right? There was networks of trade routes all across the Sahara and all across West Africa, extending eastward to Kemet or Egypt. And so that makes things more complicated as to how the Dogon came into existence. There's a map showing Mansa Musa on his pilgrimage to Mecca across and some of the trade routes.
Okay.
Indeed.
And so, yeah, did anyone else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would like to add that in agreement with Professor Hunter, it's complicated in terms of the origins, because they didn't go by the name Dogon in times past. And when you talk about the Dogon, we speak of them as kind of a a singular cohesive unit, but they're actually different groups that speak a variety of the same language. But even with that, they're related people, to the Dogon that you have to consider also in that mix, whether you're talking about the Bambara, whether you're talking about the Daguerre people in Burkina Faso, and even the Akan and the Shanti, like they're all part of a larger family that, has kind of split up over time, but you can tell in terms of certain traditions that they keep certain things intact. And so, they migrated originally. Well, I can't even say originally. What I argue is that these are the remnants of the people who lived in the Green Sahara, who were pushed out of the Sahara during the after the glacial worm period that pushed the monsoon rains further back down into Central Africa. When that happened, all the moisture disappeared from North Africa, and then that's when it started spreading. People started migrating because of the droughts and things of this nature. So this is when you get people moving into Mali, Niger, what is now Nigeria, Chad, and of course the Nile Valley. And so this is one of the reasons why you see similarities between the Dogon tradition and the Nile Valley tradition. The Nile Valley tradition, they developed in a unique way, but you can tell that the Dogon and the people in the Nile Valley had the same root culture, which was found, in the Sahara. And so they developed, in my opinion, more elaborately and more detailed than the ancient Egyptian in terms of the cosmology, which we'll get into later, in West Africa. And so, these are the people who were related to the Mande folks, the Zaire, and just different ways trying to escape Islam. Same thing with the Zaire people, found themselves in that area. We got to also remember that, like the Telem who he's talking about, or the Kurumba, their original name, these were short-statured people, and most of West Africa, in the more ancient times, was populated by the short-statured people. Most of the quote-unquote tall Africans or taller Africans, are people who migrated from places like the Sudan and going into the Green Sahara and then meeting up with these people here.
So what year are we talking about? Like this, so I can just get a reference.
This is in between 7,000, between like 10,000 and up to 3,200 BCE. So this is when like when you read like the work of Sheikh Anta Diop, he'll have a good analysis. He has a good analysis on how the West Africa, how West Africa was populated, and you can tell by the names. So like the same names and clan names that you find in West Africa, as far as Senegal and Senegambia, you find in the Sudan with those particular people. And so, it's complicated, as he was saying, because just because people are there today doesn't mean that they were there in times past. People migrate and people move. And so, those things that you see in the Bandiagara cliffs were originally built by the people who were there, who moved further into the plains. So here comes the Dogon, replacing those people and things of that nature. So it's you find that all throughout African history.
Okay. I want to add one thing, and thank you for that. And that is, there's been ground penetrating radar studies from the space shuttle, a number of missions that mapped the Sahara, and they uncovered lakes, well, they're dry now, lakes and riverbeds where now you have desert. And Dr. Fred Wendorf, he predicted that, and that was found, I think that was in like the late 80s, 90s, maybe 1984. I can't remember the exact date.
Mm.
And we have to remember too that there was a lot of movement during those periods when you had the drying up. Eventually, you had the wadi, and that the dried up rivers that were around Kemet, Nubia. But remember, 1500 BC, you had that journey of Haku from Aswan, the governor of Aswan, straight on down to across the continent to West Africa, to a place called Yam, and then straight down to South Africa, so that the Twa, known by many names, who were a short people relatively, the Sam, the Twa, and Buti, Kun, those folks moved and permeated throughout the entire continent. That's why you see short people in certain of the art in ancient Kemet. And we noted that there were about 6 waves that had moved from Hoppy to permeate the rest of the continent, so that from those early pre-dynastic periods, way out in the Sahara area that had become dried, they moved into the Nile, and then the 6 waves from the Nile moved straight out toward the south and toward where Mali is. And so that the Dogon lived not only in the Bundiara cliffs, they lived on the plains and the plateaus as well. So that when you look to study the villages of the Dogon, then you find that there's a kind of like 100 or way over 100 villages there, with about 33 different languages that are spoken just amongst the Dogon, but they all come from a central belief, and that belief had to do with the star Sirius. And once again, that same Sirius that they believed that they all came from, no matter what language dialect variation they had, they came from that one same source, which was the source that was recognized in ancient Kemet. And when we think about the astronomical facts, we realize that they were constantly looking at the stars. That in Kemet you had the once I started looking at the picture, but it's my mind. But anyway, the Neptuplio was an astronomical center, is what I'm saying. And same thing during King Tut, when he had that a coffer, right? A kind of a box. It had on it an astronomical tower, so that these concepts and ideas permeated with the movement and variations of the people.
Okay. So, why should we know about the Dogon people? Like, why is this important for us? Anybody?
Well, I could say something briefly. As a person of science, one of the reasons why I promote the study of the Dogon, in part, is because I'm trying to get a lot of us to get to the PhD level in any of the STEM fields. And I want to show young African people that the sciences is a part of their heritage. So, by the study of the Dogon, you may be interested in taking it further and becoming an astrophysicist, for example, or even a theoretical physicist, dealing on a quantum level on certain things. Because they of course, we know about them looking at the stars and things, but there's a text that I'm working on called Quantum Field Theory as African Heritage. And the Dogon are one of, many different African wisdom traditions that I examine and compare their cosmological hypotheses and theories in relationship to modern quantum mechanics, field theory, in the standard the standard model, and to show that the principal ideas which gives character and salience to the modern, quantum mechanics and astrophysics was already present in, these African traditions. And thus we ask the question, how far could Africa have gone had they been left to their own devices? Because they were already on that trajectory.
Yeah.
So the Dogon become very important, for me at least, in promoting the sciences and to show young African American people, just Africans in general, that when we're talking about sciences and the universe and things of this nature, that they don't have to solely reference the Europeans, that they have grounding in their own wisdom traditions on the continent, and that it is their duty to continue the scholarship and expand it. And so, go to school and contribute within these particular fields if you have that interest.
Okay. So, Professor Adams, the Dogons, what was their primary economic source?
Well, today they're agriculturalists, and they primarily grow sorghum, millet, particularly sorghum. They also make a great sorghum beer. I wish I could get the Dogon sorghum beer. I mean, that could be an export in the meantime. But
wow.
Well, that's really important for community rituals and harmony. Here we may have coffee or tea, but for them, sorghum was very important. And they also grow rice and onions as well. And those things are traded with other Africans, the Fulani or Pil, as they also called, and others in Mali, for things that they don't grow themselves. But that's their primary economic resource.
Okay. Dr. Jeffries, can you, well, let me ask this question. Is there any major significance to the Dogon pottery? The Dogon pottery. Is there any major significance to it?
Oh, absolutely. Because the clay, the earth itself and clay is very, very important in traditional cultures. There's Pemba, they call it. If you're down in the Congo, it's Pemba. And Pemba is a major part of putting it on your face and in rituals. Because it's part often of the riverbed, is where you get the various kinds of clays. In Kemet, once again, once we find things very, very strong, pottery amongst the Dogon, funerals, they will gather these pots up of a person and they will crack the pot, at the funeral, as a symbol that the spirit has left the body, so that the clay becomes the earthen body that we know of in Genesis, right? Where you stoop down and you create man out of the dust of the earth that becomes the clay. There it is. The picture of them at a funeral before the procession really starts. There's things that's done, and that is acknowledging that spirit has left the clay body. And so we find that same custom in the Congo, where you have a big iron pot and a piece of the iron is cracked off as hard as that iron is, so that you deliberately had to do this. And what does this mean with here it is, African American history, that my father tell me about when they were young. He was a boy. He would carry out into the woods and into the places where whites would not go to bury black people. He would carry the cup, the clock, the cup, the saucer, so that those were in essence Congo burials. They were burials the same as you would find amongst the Dogon people in the use of the clay. The clay is very important in places that was read. In fact, the rap, Queen Afua, all you have to do is know about Queen Afua.
Oh, yes.
With eating clay. Dr. Fukiao was taught me that long before Queen Afua. I knew Dr. Fukiao. And so this body rap, clay means more in traditional societies than it does with us. You go to Kenya, they will mix the dung with the clay to make bricks for their homes. So the homes are literally, of course, the smell. They know how to take away the smell, and they use the material substance. so that that clay, and in the comparison between the Congo and the U.S. styles, etc., we come to compare it with Kemet, because we go back to Kemet and we find that who is seated at the potter's wheel with clay creating human beings, but it's Khnum. So Khnum at the potter's wheel creating human beings, two forms that represent one individual. Because why? We have an inner man, we have an inner woman, we have inner spirit. And then too, if you were to read some of the conversations with Gautamela, then you find out that they had a primitive understanding of the pottery and the sciences around the pot. For instance, you would, here's a quick section, I'm not going to be reading whatever. It says, the stars came from pellets of earth flung out into the space by God Amma, the one God. He had created the sun and the moon by a more complicated process, which was not the first known to man, but it is the first attested invention of God, the art of pottery. The art of pottery. The sun is, in a sense, a pot raised once and for all for the white heat and surrounded by a spiral of red copper with 8 turns. The moon is the sense of the shape, but its copper is white. It was heated by 1/4 at a time. So that's, of course, Dr. Hunter Adams will know about that. But then they still go on to say, and God Amma took a lump of clay and squeezed it in his hand and flung it from him. And he had
Oh, you're faded out. I can't hear you.
on the earth. And so on and on, as I can't read the whole thing, but it gives you an idea how the literature, the mythology, the rituals, the ceremonies, great societies, the essence coming from, and then one last reference, because I'm constantly making reference to the culture of Africa with that of Kemet, because I've been doing this for years. 1969 in San Jose State, California, I had 200 people in an auditorium class, 100 enrolled in the class, and 100 from the city, because Leonard and I had mounted these crates, big old crates, over 6 feet tall, full of the Dogon art, full of the city images and other things. And we shipped it from Africa to California. And California put up an exhibition in their City Hall museum, the city museum.
Wow.
And it was of these objects and the Dogon and stuff included. And what museum was not too far away? The Rosicrucian Ancient Egyptian Museum.
Wow.
1969, you see this book is all coming apart. I have a rubber band to keep it apart. This book that I used 1969 to that class for them to, and most people at that time, 1969 had not been to Africa. Our Richard Kings, our Hunter Adams, our beloved Francis Welsing, and even Ashua Kwesi, because it was 1987 that heroic Dr. Leonard Jeffries and James Smalls and all of, but out of that big body of people giving a conference talk in Kemet, the 1,000, which of the speakers spoke in reference to Kemet related to the rest of the continent? It was Rosalind Jeffries.
Yes.
None of the others.
Yep. Wow. Wow. Professor Adams, you have anything to add onto the significance of pottery?
Yes. Well, not on pottery, but one of the things that's often overlooked when we talk about African culture and lifeways and history is that they had a social theory. They had a theory of life. It's really important that we look at those more or less philosophical aspects as well. And Dr. Asar, he can chime in on this. But one of the most important things for the Dogon was their epistemology. That is their complex theory of knowledge, which Marcel Grioli was exposed to, at least only part of it, even though he spent 25 years there serving the French, because we have to remember that, which a lot of people forget, is that Mali was a French colony. And the whole purpose of him and other anthropologists all over the continent being there was to learn as much about the local people as possible to make the administration of those colonies more efficient so that they could extract whatever they could, whether it was mineral resources or whatever it was. So that was the purpose of Grioli being there. And in fact, there's pictures of him looking like someone like Indiana Jones with his hat on, sitting in a tent, right, taking notes. And so all his notes, which a number of anthropologists have found, indicate he had contempt for the Dogon, despite on one level finding their cosmology and other things interesting, but he still was a colonist. He had what I call the colonizer's code to describe them when you read his notes. And that's something that a lot of people don't talk about. Robert Temple doesn't talk about that in his book, The Sirius Mystery, and others. They don't even deal with the fact of why Grioli was there. Because they had a mission that they went from Sudan or Eastern Sudan to Sudan today across the continent. They're French colonies. And so that's why they were there. And so one of the things that Grioli happened to discover was a little bit about the Dogon's epistemology, their theory of knowledge. That has various levels, 7 different levels. And, I can come back to them if you want me to talk about them now.
Yeah, you've already opened the door, Professor Adams.
One of the most important things is the notion of what is a person, right?
Okay.
And there's so many parallels between the Dogon ideas of a person and their ancestors in the Nile Valley ideas of a person. And a person is not just our physical body. Yes, they call that the gozu, and compromising all aspects of our physical body. But then there was something called niyama, right? The impersonal animating energy that animates the human body is present to varying degrees in all living things. And so they saw that there was a continuity between all of life and themselves. There was no separation, right? And then there's something called hakili, which, the best English term would be spirit. And then you had Yiru, or mind, which refers to all cognitive functions, all our creative capabilities, all of that. And then there was something known as the Kinde Kindu, or Kiniyu, or the double, that there was something else beyond your body, which probably loosely, Rosalind, could be translated into our soul. And so there's comparable things among the folks in the Nile Valley. They would, in the Nile Valley, they would also include the corpse, because your corpse is still you as a physical body, right? But you have these other components of what makes up a person. And then lastly, you had the Nani, or the ancestors, again, pointing to the continuity of life, of, quote, human life across space and time. And so this is rarely talked about. in the European, most of the popular European books on the Dogon. And then there was their various levels of education, their epistemology.
Yeah.
And Giriso, or the word at face value, typically anecdote, myths, simple explanation, something that can awaken the curiosity in children primarily. You had Beniso, the word from the side, and that was the acquisition of meanings, of hidden insights, of symbolic associations.
Okay.
And that level, you can think of it as open secrets, because one of the things that I'm doing in a piece that will be released next year on the Dogon and the cosmology of colonialism is that their levels of knowledge mirrored the classification systems of intelligence agencies. So there were some things that, was on a need to know basis, depending upon who you were up the chain, right? And so you had Goloso, the word from behind, and that was the completion of those previous levels. And that was abstract codes of classification, knowledge, how you acquire knowledge, access to their 266 symbolic signs. Then you had Sodani, the clear word, or the complex edifice of knowledge, which also included medicine, astronomy, insights into the Sirius star system. It's also called Adunoso, or speech of the word. And so then after that, you could advance, depending upon where you were socially, in stages called So Ezu, the fourth word, the final level of specialized knowledge. But then there was something called So Tani, right?
Or, you need to spell some of these words.
So Tani, SOTANIE.
Well, I was actually going to ask you, what are you reading from so that we can, pass that on to everybody?
This will be out next year.
Oh, you're reading from your book. Oh, so right. Okay. Oh, okay. We're getting a little knowledge before. Oh, okay. Okay.
But you can also, that knowledge is in the Pale Fox. So if they wanted it directly from Griole, it's explained in the Pale Fox.
Right.
Okay.
But So Tani is the astonishing word. And that is, when you get to that level, you have the capacity to bring things into existence with speech, right? And you have access to things that are only for certain people. So you may be at the So Tani level, but you may not have access to specialized knowledge that someone else may have.
Okay.
Right. And then you have Sigiso, right? This is the ritual performance of the word. That's another way of learning. We tend not to think of ritual as a way of learning, but ritual is a way of learning. That there's some things that come into being that you learn from the movement that people are making. And when those movements are done on specific days of the year, or every 10 years, every 50 years, like the Sigiso for celebrating what has been termed the star that orbits Sirius. And then lastly, and this is important, and most folks miss this, Azageso, right? This is the word of disorder, the word of distraction and deception. But also it is the forecasting word, that this is when you see Hogans or Dogon priests doing divination. And they have several different forms, but one of the most popular ones is when they lay out on the sand a grid and put pebbles on it, and then they wait for a fox, the pale fox, to cross that grid, and then from where the pawns are, well, then that allows them to make forecasts of different elements of their society. But it's a statistical process, just as the Odu Ifa is, right? So
Okay.
there's commonality there. And so that's why we have to see a cultural unity of these African systems that, depending upon the location, they manifest themselves in similar ways. But some cultures, based on their geography and history, may have developed, one aspect more than another. But there's continuity of coherence of the system. So I just wanted to mention that.
Okay. Wow, God, so much to learn. So much to learn. So, Asar, you touched a little bit about this when you were talking about like the migration of the Dogon. So, where is the Dogon at right now? Like, where are they located geographically right now?
They're located in Mali, in the Bandigara Cliffs, which is kind of, on the east part, which is just above, kind of Burkina Faso. But as I mentioned, again, that name, and I remember speaking to some people from that region. They were like the Dogon is really kind of the name of the priesthood that just became associated with the entire group. But when you're looking at the people like the Dagara people, from Burkina Faso and the Bambara and Mande, these are all technically Dogons. In terms of their name, and the root of it is Ogo, and D is a prefix, and then the N is an agent suffix. And matter of fact, you would the equivalent in the ancient Egyptian language, we say Heka or Hekaru, but it is the last, without, and when I wish I had a slide for it, the last letter in the word is really what we call a nasalized volar trill. It's a type of R sound. So you say Hekaru, but it can it can morph into an N sound. But their priests, certain of their priests in ancient Egypt was called essentially the same name as the Hogon that Professor Adams mentioned earlier, in terms of the name of their priest. And so we got to understand that it's a I wrote an article a long time ago, but I reorganized it for one of our good brothers who has a community journal, and it's called The African Superhighway of Wisdom. And what I talk about in that text is this system of pre-colonial, and it still exists to this date. We note trade routes, throughout Africa and around the world. Every place got trade routes that goods and services, go through. But in particular in Africa, you have what we call, instead of saying secret societies, I use what Dr. Kaikosa Kajangu, calls a wisdom center. And so, the Dogon is a wisdom center. And then you have, what is called a wisdom tradition, or whatnot. So you have these different wisdom centers across Africa, and there are individuals who will leave their home territory and go learn under the feet of, or at the feet, I should say, of other wisdom traditions in various locations. And throughout time, they have created kind of an intellectual trade route.
Okay.
That exists all in West Africa, in Central Africa. And there are a number of people who still go on this highway of wisdom. Of course, cars and planes have made it easier now. But what I wanted to add in terms of what Professor Hunter was talking about in terms of their epistemology, and pedagogy is that their societies, or the Dogon society, everything that you see and engage with is used as a tool to teach something. And in each one of there's different castes and classes and organizations within the society. So it's not just like one tradition within the society that everyone learns from. If you are a blacksmith, there's a guild of blacksmiths, and there's a tradition within that the weave crafters don't know. And farmers and stuff is they're their own. You know how, like, when you go to a university, there's colleges. So you have the College of Business, you have the college, whatever. That's how the society is broken up in terms of the crafts, and each one of those crafts, has their own thing. So when you're reading a lot of these cosmological stories and things of that nature, you have to ask, in what tradition and what craft is that from? Because one is going to tell it from the perspective of a blacksmith, another one's going to tell it from the perspective of an agriculturalist, of a farmer, and then of course the stargazers, they have their thing, and the weave crafters, they have their thing, and they have all different types of stories that they weave together based upon their craft. And this is certain things that you'll see shared. And I just wanted to add this last thing, that when he talked about the different aspects of the person, the word for person is, I think it's like deme. It's the same, it's cognate with the word remech in the ancient Egyptian. That's what the actual Egyptians called themselves, remech. And so in Coptic, it was lome or rome in terms of without the suffix, at the end. But the Bambara Fulani in that area, I like to use their term, their phrase. I forgot what it is in their language, but Amadou Abakri Ba talks about the people of the person. So you can't talk about like a singular, like just an entity, like just Asar Imhotep. When you talk about me as an individual, understand that there's people inside of me, different aspects. So when you talk about you talk about the people of the person, and these are these different, the soul, spirit, and mind, your name,
the 7 different
ancestors, all of that come together. And so of course, I'm a lot younger than our elders on the panel. So, I don't know if they were in the cartoons back in the late 80s, saying in early 90s, it would know about, but would know about Voltron. But for those who remember, Voltron, there were separate, robotic, lions or cats or whatnot, but then they would combine to make one large robot, saying that's how, in essence, many of the African people conceptualize the human being, is that there's these different components that form like Voltron, and then you get, the human being. But
that's why the European notion of human is limiting. Limiting. So when they say that we were not human beings, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 1857, Taney, said that Africans are beings of an inferior order. Of course, that has never been overturned, overruled, or even challenged. They removed the bust of him in Congress, but that idea that he spoke to, which President Lincoln really echoed, because he didn't have good thoughts about African people either, as Lerone Bennett talks about in his book, Forced to Glory. And so, we have to really consider these terms that we've inherited that are descriptors of us that just don't measure up. They just measure up.
Yeah.
We're multi-dimensional beings.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the term human does not capture that.
Yeah, it's like their language is so I mean, it just can't even speak to the greatness of our people. It is, they don't have words in their dictionary. Yeah. So that's great. Okay. So, one thing I just wanted everybody to know. So, you know how Asar Imhotep just broke down the suffix, the prefix, all of that goodness? He does that in Hoppy too. I've never been on a panel without this brother, and he has not broken it down. And this is how I remember stuff, Asar, is because you're breaking it down, the prefix and the suffix, and you always connect it. So that's what's up. So, Dr. Jeffries.
Because the word, I just want to say, the word is very important in African society, and especially in the Dogon society. And all of those words that he talked about, the word so is the word for word, and it's cognate with the Yoruba word, ultimately ashe, and in speech and being able to do and command and do things. But I'll end there. You was about to ask something.
Thank you. Now you're gonna use some more. I know it's coming. Dr. J, can you explain like Dogon cave art, and is it possible to and its possible relation to African groups, like other African groups, like the Dogon cave art?
Before I mention about the cave art, I wanted to just say in reference to the ontology of ethics of behavior and what we have been speaking about, that what's so important is that in those cultures of the Dogon, I found that it was the same as what Dr. Clark used to say in reference when he was talking about the Ga people and his experiences. With the Dogon, you will read that they had no suicide in their society. They had no thieves and no robbers. And when Leonard and I first got to the Ivory Coast, we were in an area that was a village-like area, and I saw this man running, and I was horrified because someone, I don't know how they did it, but had kind of like ripped the skin off the whole side of his face, and it was just a bloody, it wasn't dripping, but it was a bloody mess. I don't know what they did. And so in horror, I asked a guy, what happened? What did he do? And the guy said, he stole something.
Oh.
He stole something. Oh. And it was the same up in Ife. Those societies that were pristine, that had these various division as to wisdom and the word, etc., they grow up against suicide, against all of those things, because they bathe themselves in a positive spirit, these aspects of the spirit, and know the placement within, so that there's a mayat kind of balance and harmony with the person. And it's so taught, although there's levels of teaching, it's so taught in those very pristine areas. So that, remember when Columbus came down the coast and he went up into a village, and he said that, oh, they're so pure, they're so innocent. And he said, it will be easy to come and conquer them. That's what he said in his writings. And so that here we're talking about an ethics and a way of living, because we always interested in the family body and the continuity. So if you could see, if you had that kind of living where there was no thieves and robbers and people deceiving each other, to over cunning and over competition, over competition like we have in our modern society, there was like a different kind of human being that came about that was so spiritual oriented, until the History Channel reporting, that documentary on the Dogon, and they showed you the Hogon priest overall, and that he was sitting down, meditating and communicating with the beyond, to such a point on behalf of the people that they said if a person just secular came and just touched him, they would kill the Hogon priest, because he would no longer be fit vessel to be that intermediary with them all. And so we're talking about the building of a different kind of human being within a different kind of socio-political psychic system. And so that is what intrigued me about the Dogon people. Also, now you asked me about the the cave art.
The cave art.
The cave art that revealed these human beings with that sense of indwelling of not just the inner man, the inner woman, the inner child of your being, but the ancestral composite of not just those ancestors that were not good, but those that were worthy of continuing on, those whose names you could call because you would be, in essence, calling upon your own self. And so we can thus begin to look at some of the cave art, and people have been interested in the cave art. Well, one thing too, that was my topic when I worked with Ivan Van Sertima and showed him some things in reference to women in cave art, and he was so alarmed and so much interested until he am I still on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Charles is doing something with the microphone.
Oh, yeah, you're on. We can hear you and see you.
Oh, and see me. Oh, okay. All right.
So you were saying Ivan Van Sertima.
So Ivan Van Sertima, I worked with him, and so he was very much interested in that cave art. And so I had one of the major articles in his book, Black Women in Antiquity, and it was on women in cave art. But in reference to the Dogon people, the Western world is so interested because it shows beings that are kind of like flying in the air. And so therefore they were talking about space beings. What does the Dogon have to do with people from outer space and other places, etc.? And so I was just showing you that here you will see.
Yeah, I think I have that picture that I can show.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that there are many kinds. And if you look even on the other section here, yes, to your left in this one, it's hard to see, but in the middle of the face that's on the back of a ram, the face has a circle in the middle. And so some believe that was some kind of a space helmet that was there. Some have a full circle. Well, this has a circle and a little mouth, but some have the circle so that it covers all of the eyes, nose, and mouth. And at the end are these triangles that would be some kind of little vaulted sections of a helmet that's on the head. It's a female, but it's kind of like large genitals, not a male genitals at all. And we see that elsewhere. In other words, she as a birthing figure and some little breasts at the top. But once again, these ram shapes are the image of Amun, which became Amen, Amun, Amen. The ram of God concept was with them. There are other images that you could show again of the cave art. Let's see.
Let's see. I have some more.
Okay.
Courtesy of Dr. J.
Okay, right. And here's one of what this is one that shows the reference to going into Kemet, the same formula back and forward from the Sahara. This is Tassili, 6000 BC. And some of them will show the two shoulders of an individual. And then from the waist down, you see the side view, which is the typical format style of Kemet. The face comes to a sharp point. It's a bird reference that would be Heru, the bird reference, the ibis with the long beak, or if it's not as long, Heru, but the coiffure too, again, is definitely the hairstyle. But that floating being, that floating figure that you see in the cave art, they would say, well, these are beings from outer space. And so the people who are, here's one, but some of them show as if it's a floating being that could have come outside the person. Some show connected to a human being, and then some bypassing like this. But you remember in Kemet, we did see floating beings in the sky. There's one famous one that we know of that shows the Kepra beetle holding up the dung ball as the solar disk to be fertilized or fertilized. And then at the same time, underneath, you'll have an Ankh or a Dej column. But around the sides of the entire composite image, you will find people swimming in the sky, or even without that, swimming around the solar, so that part of the theories, as was just mentioned, all of the dimensions of the word and the levels of the beings that we are. But apart from that, there is this thought of flowing beings that seem to be from outer space. They say they came from Sirius, which is definitely outer space. But there is some text that talks about beings from other places. And so they're saying that those other places may not be as strict in their values as the Dogon are. And so thus the Dogon call themselves Ama, A-M-M-A, their supreme deity, their most high, their ancient of days, their Amen, their Amon, is that. And so therefore in Kemet we see that same concept of a God most supreme, and then the entities that come underneath that are the helpers of the in format of the major supremacy of what is. We know that Neter is the most encompassing, but underneath that is the same Amon, Amen, that you find in the Sahara cave paintings. And that Amen, we know, of course, is the suffix of Tutankh Amen, and what is it? Hatshepsut Amen, Amenemhet, and et cetera, et cetera. And then we know that in the biblical form, you look at Revelations 4:14, and it talks about the idea of Amen, or we know that the whole Amen concept was one that was far ancient before any Hebraic was born, and it came out of the pre-dynastic. So that's my point, the pre-dynastic, and that the Ram of God was there, and the concept of Amen, Amun was there as well.
Okay.
Here's one that you don't have, but you can see this. I put it up here. You see this face, and the face is one that is the face is one that is a close up has a circle in the middle of the face and just a dot in the middle of the circle. This is Chad, but it's just like the ones you see in the cave art, where you got the face, and people wonder, well, was that some kind of a flying helmet outfit that was in the spacecrafts?
Okay. Professor Adams, did you have anything to add to that?
Just a couple of things. And again, as Professor Asar said, we have to consider the guilds that are involved, and that even though you have this art, it's interpreted in different ways depending upon the guild you happen to be a part of, depending upon the level of knowledge you have attained. So one of the problems that I had with Robert Temple and his book, The Serious Mystery, is that he took what the Dogon priests told him literally, that there were beings that came from Sirius, right? The Nomo, right? Who came from Sirius and taught the Dogon everything that they know about everything. Okay. But that's the first level, right? That's the word at face value. And so they blew that up like von Daniken did with his series of books, Chariots of the Gods, to deny that African people actually created civilization in the Nile Valley. There weren't people from other planets that did that, because you can track the evolution of many of the ideas going back 8,000-10,000 years. They just didn't pop up. Right? So one of the things that we have to consider is it took many years, decades, generations to acquire that astronomical knowledge. And the most important thing, that there's many different ways of knowing. And one of the ways is that we know today is meditation. Meditation, the practice of meditation, did not originate in India. That
along with yoga.
Right, along with yoga. That is a fact. They advanced aspects of it. I'm not taking anything away from them, for sure, as did the Chinese and others, but it did not originate with them. And that's very important to know. And so when you are in the dark for a long period of time, Rosalind, and Dr. Richard King talked about this, right? When you are in the dark for 7 days, that activates a lot of neurochemicals within your pineal gland. It increases something that Richard Strassman talks about in his book, DMT, the spirit molecule. And so now you have raised yourself to another level where you can be open to experience many dimensions of reality that we normally don't experience, not even in dream time. And so that's a practice that they developed to a very high level. Some African cultures use entheogens, or now known as hallucinogenic substances, psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms, which soon will be available to treat depression, even though they still are illegal, but because there's so many positive things about them. And like among in Cameroon, Tabernacle Iboga, that's something that can arrest addictions, cocaine addiction, gambling, smoking addictions, just after one session, although it's quite traumatic. That's something, but you are allowed to contact your ancestors and have relationships with all the people in your life. And then you have an opportunity to right the wrongs, to heal the harm that you caused those people within yourself, because we're not separate. They're all part of us. And so the point that I'm making is that when we see the cave art, for example, of people flying, some say that they were astral traveling, that they were traveling within themselves to other worlds, right? Not just simply swimming, as the Cave of the Swimmers. I can't remember the archaeologist's name, but it's in a movie called The English Patient, where they go on an expedition in Western Egypt and discover the cave art there, and they find the Cave of the Swimmers. At least that's what they called it, because you saw men and women, Rosalind, seemingly flying, right? So we can't take the literal interpretation of some of these European or amateur scholars face value, because there's deeper levels of knowledge. There's many things that you may see on the face of it, but we know it's different than that.
Yeah, most definitely. Sorry, you look like you want to say something. No? Yeah? No? Okay. All right. Another one for you, Dr. Jeffries. So is there any evidence of the Dogon having communication with beings from other planets?
Well, certainly with Sirius. That's the major thing. They say they came from Sirius.
And before you go into that, can you tell everybody what Sirius is?
Okay, well, yeah, Sirius is the a star that's like in the Milky Way. It's the one that Asa Hilliard was talking about, that's in Orion's belt. The three stars in Orion belt that match up with the alignment of the three stars at the Giza Plateau. And you see Orion as a figure. Of course, the name, I don't think it's the European name, but as a hunter up in that particular star. But the most important thing about Sirius is the two invisible to the eye stars that travel around it, Sirius A and Sirius B. And the thought that those stars are, one is called Potolo, Po meaning small in size. Sometimes they reference it to the Digitaria, which is a grain. And then, but the most interesting thing is that it's one of the heaviest thing in all of the universe. That they said if you had a little teaspoonful of what was on that little planet, that it would be 5 tons in weight.
Wow.
And so the name of it is called Sagala. Metal, that they know this metal to exist, and it existed and was recorded long before we had a NASA and our space program. And that was one of the reasons why you had all of these exhibitions at the Brooklyn Museum, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And then I think the Metropolitan went on and had 2 exhibits on the, or was it the Brooklyn Museum, one of those, on the same Dogon people around the country. Everybody wants an exhibition on the art of the Dogon to get an understanding of what was going on in outer space that these people knew long before our space program and our scientists. And some of the writings, like in Nova, I think there was a program on Nova trying to deal with it, and the Omni magazine, old issue of Omni magazine, an old issue. And in this old issue, a good section on the Dogon, and they kind of like say, well, how dare they know? And so it's that same arrogance of the Western world that did not really put Black people in their proper places. And so that what the Westerners did do was to go ahead and have their best. And one of the best people to deal with the entire subject was Dr. Norman Bergram. And he was the head of the FBI, the CIA, and some other very powerful organizations in America. It took about 3 or 4 doors before you could get to him because he was doing this research on outer space. But he died a couple of years ago in his 90s. And the laws of our country was that if you worked for NASA or those places, you had in the secret areas, you were never supposed to disclose any information, even if you thought it was not secret, etc. And you had to keep secret for 30 years. But Bergram had passed his 30 years because he was in his 90s and decided to reveal all of this stuff. So there it was on the internet. There it was on the internet. Space, et cetera, at least what they thought and the skulls are to do. But I was stunned because one of them that was a Black being looked just like the Dogon, is made in metal. There's a metal figure with floppy arms to it, but the face was total Bantu. And that image and that metal rod has a counterpart that looks just like it, made in Virginia. Blacks that had come from the Manding area had moved into Virginia as iron workers. Furnaces, they ran the furnaces. I think when you were at my house, I showed you some money, old Confederate money that
Yes.
iron furnaces. So that all of these stories, that things that we talk about, they're not just locked into Africa, but they become the cultural signatures that we need to know about because they manifest in the new world. The difference is, as I mentioned, their culture was one that was so strict that if you saw a person stealing, robbing, you heard the community what they would do. The Dogon had no punishment. The Dogon had no thievery, no robbing, no suicide. And you look at America, the suicide rate is very, very high, very high. In the colleges, they talk about the competition, and then we know that when Obama came to office, it was because of pollution and corruption. They were talking about people too big to fail, and corporations and the various banks. Dr. Hunter was talking about the economics, but these were people engaged in buying company after company, the illegal kinds of mergers, common mergers today. And we talk about people misusing their body. So the large percentage of people that use abortion as contraceptive, which is an abomination to the human body. And so therefore, we know that the comparison between one and the other is society. So thus we're interested in those societies that functioned in a positive way, no matter where they were in the world, whether it was in Asia, in South America, in Australia, in wherever. So therefore, we do study these things as part of the origin of who Black people are.
So Asar, you have anything to add to that in terms of like the communication with other planets? Like any evidence? Or Professor Adams?
I tend to agree with Professor Adams in terms of the stories, and there's different levels and different perceptions depending on what craft you are in, in any of the societies, but especially among the Dogon. But I will also say that, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, that the Dogon are related to a number of people in that area, and one of them being the Daguerre people. And if you have read the initiatory text of Dr. Malidoma Somé,
right,
and he talks about in their tradition, in their wisdom tradition, being able to communicate with different beings from other realms. One, what they call the Kotemble, for example, and that. And I'm not arguing that what he is saying is true. I'm just a messenger at this point. That they can go transdimensionally into other realms. And so it's not like they are arguing that, like it's straight from outer space. Like they look into outer space there and they're interacting with these beings. They may be underground in the underworld, or just is some other dimension. So like Malidoma Somé talks about during his initiation, he had to jump through this hoop, right? And in the hoop, it was, covered by some kind of gelatin substance. But when they went through the hoop, it, of course, they had their own words of power, what we would call Heka in the ancient Egyptian tradition. They had their own words of power that opened a gate. And when he went through the gate, they transformed into basically photons, light, to be able to go through whatever the doorway is and arrive on the other side and interact with different beings. And so that concept is not new in terms of interacting. And what Malidoma Some will say is that we got knowledge from these beings. This is, when they feel that we are collectively ready to get some information, then they will dispense it upon our wise elders and stuff to that nature. And you kind of find that with some of the Bambara traditions, in in the Ivory Coast and in Mali. And so, they kind of have a coherent perspective, saying along those lines. Now, some people interpret it as there's some alien ships coming in and they're landing and talking to the Dogon and other people's there. I haven't come across, anything that would support that in terms of a testimonial or an ideology. But that is very, very common, especially in West Africa.
I just want to add to that, that even in Beyonce's film, Disney film, Black is King, they show a person as a beam of light coming from beyond the planet and landing on Earth. Now, why was that important? I don't know who her advisors were, but technically speaking, all of us are beings of light, that we all are composed of elements that were created billions of years ago that are in stars. And so we are stardust, quote. And you find evidence of that in many different African societies. Like in Kemet, they talk about the Aku, the light dimension of ourselves. And sometimes you see scenes where netchers are laying their hands on a king or queen or somebody, right? And just like people lay their hands on each other, Reverend Rosalind Jeffries, in church, they're transmitting the light from the palm of their hands, right? And I was fortunate enough to do a summer course in Germany, in Dusseldorf, Germany, about 10 years ago, that looked at the whole notion of biophotons, that there's light that our brains emit, there's light that our hearts emit. We are beings of light, although it's hard, you can't see it with your eyes unless you're in an extremely dark place. That's why they went to the caves, right? Because that allowed that light to be seen. And so they knew that we were more than just this physical body. And so it's important that we understand those type of things. And on the notion of beings, well, I tried it myself, but ayahuasca, right? A plant that's used in rituals in Central America and Mexico and other places. And now folks have got into it, that when you take certain doses, particularly with psilocybin mushrooms, that when you take what they call the hero's dose, well, then suddenly these interdimensional beings or ancestors will appear to you, into your consciousness, that you can perceive their existence, because your brain is kind of rewired to allow for that type of perception. Unfortunately, the people who write most of those books, they don't look at the neuroscience of that. I mean, I did graduate studies in neuroscience at the University of College of London, 1991, and my own research. And so you learn that we really don't know how our brains work. Even today, despite all technology, despite all the people for hundreds of years who've been studying neuroscience. What really got me into neuroscience was when I saw the Edwin C. Smith papyrus. It's in the University of Chicago Oriental Institute. They should give it back. But anyway,
along with some other things.
there in that papyrus, you have the first word in any human language for brain, right? They had mapped different parts of the brain then. They were doing neurosurgery then 4,000 years ago. And that's what really inspired me to really pursue the whole. In fact, when I went to Chicago Medical School, I was trying to go to medical school. That didn't work out. But my textbook by Kandel and Schwartz had the Medu Neter word for brain on the cover, that they acknowledged, that Eric Kandel acknowledged, he's a Nobel Prize winner for neuroscience, acknowledged in the textbook that neuroscience began not in Greece, but in Kemet, right? Wow. And that's something that most people don't know, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's important that they understood not just, at that level of neurophysiology then, but they also understood multiple dimensions of mind.
Yeah.
That's why you see that, for example, the Blue Lotus, right? Why that was so important to them, because not only the fragrance of the Blue Lotus that was used to enhance sexual experience, pleasure, but also to raise the level of consciousness as well.
Oh.
There were specific rituals that used the Blue Lotus, or actually it's the water lily. It really wasn't a lotus.
And it's the same flower that was found in the Nile in the Hoppy. Yeah.
Right. And you can buy on Amazon.com Blue Lotus leaves.
I have, I keep one around my neck. Yeah.
Right. And so you see the person in many of the texts emerging out of the lotus. That means that he or she is emerging into a higher level of consciousness.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
One thing he mentioned about the church, and certainly there's an awareness of the dimensions and different types of spirits in the church and the biblical data. And the warning is that which voice, and constantly ask, which voice are you listening to? Or what voices are you listening to? And so that even if you put aside some of the information about beings from outer space, whether it's just pictorial or that it's real or not real, etc., those questions will always be there. And we do know that if you live a life that's not worthy and not right, there'll be entities to come to try to entertain you. People in psychiatry know this very well, people in the mental hospitals. And so that we can stand on the fact that the Dogon believed in Amma, basically a one God. They believed in the word of God, which was the Nomo, the Numo. The Kemetic people believed in Jehuti, who was the word of God. And so that the thought that Jesus came as what? The word of God to do what? To clarify the mythologies and the stories and the things that were wrong, to make them right again. To do what? To keep us whole. Jesus said most often, be thou whole, more than be healed. He said be healed, but be thou whole means that you are whole with your right family, with your right socialization, with your right, all of the dimensions that we were saying in reference to the wisdom knowledge. And so that is where we ultimately stand, saying that those ancestors that came through slavery, managed to hold on no matter what bad interpretations of biblical data was given to them. And we know about the slave Bible that was in Washington, D.C. on display for 2 years. We know that that slave Bible was how it was messed with, and the books that said Exodus and certain things to build up the human spirit was misinterpreted. And so we can go back and look at the origin of some of the culture that was in the Bible that comes from these traditional cultures of wisdom and truth, and also from Kemet, that guarded and maintained, so much so that people were willing to run away like Akhenaten. When things got polluted in ancient Egypt, woe to Egypt, woe to Egypt. When things did get so polluted, what did he do? Took people out. As Infadishi Hassan always said, can you imagine a black man taking a mass of black people out in the desert to say, follow me? But they were so polluted, I guess, and say, no, we're going to follow you. And so this would be the people that would be following the Hogon priest, people who guarded the right way, the righteousness, the Mayatian way, Mayat. And that was so important to us.
Okay. Yeah. Asar, is there any evidence of the Dogon philosophy that relates to biological science?
Well, as I stated previously, that the nature.
Wait. Let me just stop you. You don't stop saying that to me, okay? I didn't know.
I just want to reiterate to the audience.
Okay.
That the stories of the Dogon are told from many different crafts, including those who are concerned with medicine and biology and things of this nature. And it's even said directly in the Pale Fox. So I can actually read. This is on page, what is this? If anybody has the Pale Fox, this is at the beginning in the intro, page 57.
Okay.
And
I just have a cover of the book I can show.
I'll read it right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's under the subheading of Dogon thought. And it says, like other African societies, the Dogon know and have analyzed all the facts, beings, and things which surrounded them. Like others, they have attempted to make a synthesis of these. Having observed and studied everything within range of their perception, they have constructed an indigenous explanation of the manifestations of nature, anthropology, botany, zoology, geology, astronomy, anatomy, and physiology, as well as social facts, social structures, religious and political structures, crafts, arts, economy, etc. The Dogon possess systems of signs or ideographs, including several thousands on astronomy and calendars, a numerical system, extensive psychological and anatomical knowledge, genetics, and a systematic pharmacopoeia. The knowledge encompasses the smallest twig and the tiniest animal. The spider, the worm, and the dragonfly are considered of the same importance as the lion. All of the conditions of life to which man is subject are inscribed therein, and more stuff and more stuff. But the point I wanted to note is that they're specifically, so remember, this text was originally written in French, like in the 50s. You know, genetics wasn't really a thing. The human genome wasn't mapped until the 90s or whatnot. So this notion of genealogy, genetics, and the splicing of cells and all of this is embedded in the wisdom tradition. And we got to understand that, you know, the Dogon embody that common phrase, as above, so below, you know, as above, that we can use different things to hypothesize about how things move in another, you know, area of interest. So for them, we talk about the cosmic egg, for example, which is Amma itself.
Uh-huh.
Their ideas of this cosmic egg, of course, comes from some bird eggs, which they observed over time, but also the seeds. By just studying seeds and how they germinate, and from these things, they started speculating on how humans form, from the same particular process. And so, this is one of the importance of the Pale Fox as a text, because it goes through all of that stuff, and then relates it to like the birth of stars and planets and things of this nature. So they're using the similar things to manifest or to articulate the commonalities in terms of creation. And one of the things that I, because I've been really over the years trying to narrow down and harness or narrow down and articulate a more accurate way to categorize, African people in many different ways, because of just, because everybody's technically African, since all Homo sapiens sapiens derived from the continent of Africa. But that means that there's really no distinction if you just say that. So in other words, how can we categorize the people on the continent of Africa that would separate them outside of skin color and hair texture, which we have a diverse way of we have diverse morphology even within the continent of Africa. And one of the ways in which I categorize, the majority of African groups is with this concept that I borrowed from Fukuyao and just the Bantu Congo in general, called Kimoyo. And Kimoyo is really kind of the art of vitality. And this is based upon this idea that God is the only thing that exists. So when we talk about Amma, it says in the Pale Fox that Amma is everything. Amma is the universe. And so all of these creation things are just expressions of Amma, in these particular different forms and areas, which is why what I just read, they talked about everything being connected in a way, because it's just all expressions of Amma. Amma is all that exists. That mentality is found all throughout the continent. And because of that notion that, God is an infinite, being, and that encompasses all things, that is the universe itself, it is filled with a certain vitality. So Professor Hunter mentioned Nyama earlier, amongst the Dogon, which is this kind of fluid energy that permeates through the blood and whatnot. It's this vitality notion again. And it's that same kind of notion is what Fukuyao talks about when he talks about moyo. Moyo is technically a word for heart, but the words for heart in African languages become the word for spirit, soul, vitality, life. So when you're talking about Kimoyo, it's the principle of life. And you'll read throughout the Pale Fox how Amma is in his spinning, manifest this principle of life. Life is motion in African traditions. And so the art of Kimoyo is the knowledge in the science. And this is going back to your question. I know it's a long way, but it's the knowledge in the science of being able to transfer or to be able to add life to life. Do you know the art to take life and transfer it, into another area and vitalize and empower it to be able to act and do what it was, created or designed to do. And so with that in mind, this principle of vitality, or Kimoyo, they study the universe to see how life forms in all areas, what sustains life, what diminishes it in this area, so we can reduplicate this in all areas of our life. So if we understand how life is made and transferred, you know, from organism to organism and things of this nature, how planets are formed and all of this, we can reduplicate that in terms of our society. So we have to learn the art of kimoyo, the art of vitality. And this is where all of this knowledge, this knowledge is coming from, trying to understand that. So when it comes to our interpersonal relationships, how when I interact with you, do I add life to life? What is involved in that process that, you know, when we interact, you feel whole, that you feel good and vitalized, that you want to do stuff, you know, with me or the community, and we can build together and do this. And this goes to the economy and stuff to this nature. You know, we have to know the sciences of agriculture. We, of course, if we're going to feed ourselves, but of course have enough to sell, you know, to other folks, you know, who may want some things. It's just, it's a very practical thing, but you know, it is very deep in terms of its purpose and the dynamics of this particular principle. And it all derives from this notion, of course, that God is everything. So everything is divine. Everything is empowered by this Nyame. And Nyame and Zambe, dualities are words for God itself. And so, you know, if you have this God spark, you know, how do we access the God spark? If you know, for a lack of a better term, and be able to utilize it to empower and improve our lives. And so from that comes that those studies of genetics and biology and things of that nature, because of course, you know, the most valuable thing in any community is the people, the living community itself. So, you know, we want to make sure that everyone is sound and healthy and things of that nature. So we got to understand what that means. What does healthy mean? How does that look like? So these are the things that we study. And so, you know, I'll end there.
Okay. Yes.
And doing so too, adding life to life, we can also go back and look at African American history. How did we overcome the odds, the beatings, the torture, the breaking up of families? There were people there that had come from these systems, and they were always interested in redeeming and rebuilding and reorganizing. And so that the whole mission of Booker T. Washington was that, up from slavery to reorganize, to rebuild, to the point of that he was the head of the National Black Business League, is what he grew and he developed. The Marcus Garvey that had a program of many entities coming together, the Flying Eagles, the UNIA, the Black Press, and on and on. And so throughout, our heroes that we begin to uphold, but to uphold that along with backtracking to find out what is Black in Black is the point where we are, because people have become so miscegenated and so moved away from themselves until the question is autosoteric, to the pollution of the self, that you have to save yourself. You save yourself and save your community by the examples of those great heroes that we still uphold, as we began this whole lecture with Hunter talking about the curriculum and the problems in the curriculum of being exactly who you are and the freedom to be who you are. Some people think the freedom is who you is to be someone else rather than the Blackness that you are. We have those choices, but it's up to us coming through the HAPI system to bring about the truth that was embedded in our ancestors, the way of knowledge to add life to life.
Yes. Okay. I just have a couple more questions, but I'm just letting everybody know, do not sign off, because we have a special guest waiting. He's going to close us out. That's all I'm saying. We have a special guest waiting. All right. Professor Adams. So you were one of the founders, along with Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. Jacob Carruthers, Professor Runoko Rashidi, for the Journal of African Civilization. Okay, where you like featured essays on amazing astronomical information about the Dogon people of West African nation, and you challenged and you challenged European myths as well on how they acquired this knowledge. So can you just kind of talk a little bit about this journal? Like when did you start this journal, and some of the details?
In 1979, and
Wow.
Dr. Van Sertima came to Chicago, and we held a series of meetings at now it's called the Jacob Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies, named after Dr. Carruthers, because we felt that our narrative, our way of looking at the world, was not present in academia. And so Ivan really pushed the notion. I mean, his book, They Came Before Columbus, really upset a whole lot of people on the notion that Africans did cross Atlantic hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years before Columbus and others. And so he felt that there was a need that we have our own journal that considered African civilizations in the broad context, that it wasn't just Kemet. There were civilizations in Mali, in Ghana, in South Africa, in Central Africa, and so forth. And so after a lot of deep discussion and debate, the Journal of African Civilizations was born. And so I had a feature essay in that one on the Sirius mystery, as it was called, after Robert Temple's book, The Sirius Mystery, when he took published in English aspects of the Dogon astronomical knowledge and cosmology and so forth. But Temple, it came out like this. You had one group of Europeans who said that aliens came and told the Dogon all of this, right? Then you had the deniers. Kenneth Brecher, at that time, he was the director of the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles, right above the Hollywood sign, right? And he was someone who said that their knowledge, their myths conflict with scientific truth. And in fact, they have no business knowing this. He was that arrogant. And so I wrote an article to denounce and debunk what he said.
Thank you.
It was extremely arrogant for him to say that, but I understood, because he represented the global system of science. And so how can when he learned that African people didn't do anything, reading Hegel, that we haven't even gotten to history yet, and others, how could these people know all of this, right? So it was a challenge to him. But what he forgot, what most people forget, is that, yes, science and religion split after the trial of Galileo in the 16th century, right? There was the Council of Trent, and they convicted Galileo because he said that the earth revolves around the sun. But Africans knew that. We see that in the artwork in the Nile Valley and other places, right? They knew that the earth was not flat, right? Right? That it was a sphere. And so that led to the split between, quote, science and religion, because science was conflicting with many biblical theological ideas.
Yeah.
And so you have to believe, it was challenging your faith, your belief, But, and so that led to the split, the growing split that we still have today. But Africans, as Professor Asar said, we had a holistic view of everything, that everything was infused with divinity. And so people took names of divinity in Kemet and other places, right? That was part of their being, to recognize that. As my music teacher and musicologist, Phil Coran, from which Maurice White of Earth, Wind, and Fire, the late Maurice White, studied under Phil Coran, because Phil Coran studied under Sun Ra, right? And so one of the things that he told me in 1970 is that for the African, you can't know anything unless you study everything. And where are we at today? Now, many colleges and universities in Europe and the United States have interdisciplinary departments, that they are learning to see how all these various disciplines are connected. And it's better that we learn from each other rather than being in silos, that the physicists are over here, the scientists over here, over there, the anthropologists are here, the business schools over here, because everyone can inform the other. But that's the traditional African wisdom way, right? And so now Europeans are beginning to see that, such that many of the huge projects have people from different disciplines working on them, right? And so that's really important. So the Journal of African Civilization, unfortunately, is not being published anymore, after Van Sertima's death, but a whole series of books he published that came out of the journal. And so it was a privilege to work with him and many of the other authors who made contributions to that journal.
Yeah. Wow. Since I'm talking to you now, can you just give us a definition of science and explain the difference between science ways of knowing versus religion?
First off, the word science in Latin means to know, right? That's what the word actually means, to know. But from the 18th century, thanks to many Europeans, they developed a method of generating hypotheses from their observations to prove whether or not their hypothesis was correct or not. And so that evolved into the scientific method. Now, it's supposed to be objective, but it's not in the real world. It's not objective. I mean, to a degree it is, but it's not, because who's paying for the research, right? The tobacco industry paid people back in the 60s and 50s to say that cigarettes are good for you. Had advertisements of women smoking cigarettes to get women hooked on tobacco. But was that research objective? No, because it was driven by the funders who had their own objectives. Is science neutral? That is it value neutral? No. And the National Academy of Sciences has a publication, I think you can find it online, called On Being a Scientist, where they lay out the importance of the values that a scientist has and how it impacts and influences the work that they're doing. We see this controversy right now happening with AI, or artificial intelligence. How far should we go in developing these AI systems, right? Yeah. Because they want to say, well, there's no ethics involved here. But we know that white people are writing the algorithms.
Exactly.
And Dr. Rua Benjamin talks about this in her book, that they're writing algorithms that end up discriminating against us.
Yeah.
Writing the facial recognition software such that many people with color who look like us look the same. And so those algorithms will identify us as possible criminals. And so ethics becomes very, very important. That's one of the things that's not talked about until there's consequences, until the consequences come up. They say, oh, we should not have gone down that track. Like Netflix has a film that I suggest that our viewers will watch called The Social Media Dilemma, about how Facebook, Google, Twitter created algorithms that amplify disinformation so that they can make more money. Disinformation is monetized by those platforms. And it got to be so bad that many former executives, and it's in the film, came out to protest that we need to slow down and stop and revisit what these platforms are doing, because Dr. Rosalind, it's leading to a lot of suicides among youth because they're addicted to their screens, right? It's having people on edge such that their attention span is only 40 seconds. And so they click, oh, I like this, I like that, and they keep on stepping. And so, that's the importance of ethics. But that was a core fundamental aspect of African epistemology, was ethics. That's what ma'at meant, among many other things that it meant, is that if you did not have an ethical system to guide your scientific endeavors, right, or even your theological endeavors, well, then the society could go off track.
Yeah. So, speaking, I just want to let everybody know, if you want to hear more from Professor Adams, he's actually, along with two other HAPI cast members, they are having a seminar, and let me get this up on the screen for you guys to look at. They're having a seminar on this Friday, African Sacred Science webinar. You have to tune in for this. This is, it's $20. For the seminar, which I think is grossly, underrated here. You have Dr. Patricia Newton. Oh, actually, everybody is on this panel is in HAPI. So you have Professor, I'm sorry, let me start over. We have Dr. Patricia Newton. She's going to be moderating it. We have Professor James Small. We have Dr. Wade Nobles, and we have Professor Hunter Adams. So if you go to Eventbrite and just put in African Sacred Science, it comes right up. And so I'm going to put that up there for you guys. But you should definitely check this out. This is going to be great. It's this Friday.
What time?
So, it's at 7 o'clock. You guys are starting at 7 o'clock, I believe, right?
Yes.
Yeah, 7 o'clock. Yeah.
Eastern time?
Yes. 7 Eastern Standard Time. Thank you. So it's this Friday. Professor Small, Patricia Newton, Dr. Wade Nobles, and my man right here, Professor Adams. So, along this note, can you just talk just a little bit, because you don't want to give too much away, since you're going to be talking about the African sacred science, but can you talk, what does it mean? What is meant by African sacred science, and how can it be revived?
Well, the whole notion of sacred science evolved out of a number of anthropologists and architects looking at the geometry of temples and tombs in Kemet and other places. And they found that many of the designs replicated designs that they see in nature. And one of the things that I showed on that flyer was something called the Fibonacci spiral, right? And we find that particular spiral pattern. And that's one of the things that Africans taught us, that you have to look at the patterns of things to see the relationships of things. And we find that that particular pattern is seen in the growth of, say, cauliflower or sunflowers. You find the same pattern in galaxies and so forth. And so, again, that speaks to the connectivity of things that are above us, below us, that are all around us. And so they didn't, there is no term in any African language that I know of sacred science, right? Because everything was that.
Okay.
But this is to hopefully get people, our architects, when they design buildings, to consider the whole spatial environment of the building. Like the temples in Kemet, many of them are aligned to the rising and setting of stars, particularly Sirius and the constellation of Orion, or Sahu, as they called it, because they felt that if their buildings, in many cases Dogon villages, are aligned to the cosmos, well, then that cosmic harmony can impact and influence their local economy and ecologies. And so that's what's sacred. That's different from, just putting a building up.
Like feng shui.
Right, feng shui, exactly. Because it's important how you can move those energies around to enhance the life within the community or within your own house.
Yeah.
So everything is, needs to be placed in a certain position. Some people say that we should sleep with our heads to the north, so we're aligned with the polar star, right? Some people, not everyone says that, but that's the notion of sacred science that we'll be exploring to see how far back can we find evidence of that. And there's medical anthropologist Alondra Oubre at University of California, Berkeley, and she has a book called Instinct and Revelation. It's hard to find, and she argues that there's a 500,000 year continuum, Dr. Jeffries, of African spiritual traditions, right? That you can find aspects of along this continuum of African people, no matter where they moved on the continent. You can find aspects of those traditions. So that's what we mean by sacred science.
Okay, well, I got a lot of questions about that. I cannot wait. I already have my ticket. Friday, I'm there. It's going to be great. I can't wait. Everybody is doing this seminar. You got this is going to be great. It's going to be great. Dr. Jeffries, is there any representation of the principle of Hoppy in Dogon culture?
Oh, yes, there was much, as I was just talking all along, almost everything I was talking about, I was always trying to go back to make a reference to Kemet. But certainly we can know that when you have the nomo, two beings that represent what? They represented germination, spermatization, they represent undulation, water itself, and voice, the voice that went forward. The voice is not just one voice, but it, the sound of many waters is that concept. And so what is Jehuti but the word that goes forward? And what is on the solar wing disc over every door that's sacred in the sacred temples and sacred places? You see a solar disc, two serpents on both sides of the disc. And then so that doubling, that two serpents is certainly the Dogon, two serpents that represent the proper spirit of what? Of Amma, of God Supreme. So God Supreme's voice is the voice that spoke the world into existence, that said, let there be, and there was. So that is just one example of the very many.
Yeah. You were giving them all night. Okay, so yeah, so just in closing, and remember, everyone who is tuned in now, we have a special guest. As soon as we answer this last question, we have a special guest coming on. I'm so excited. This person always makes me smile. So Asar, are there any books, like you mentioned the Pale Fox? Are there any other books that we can can go to get more information about the Dogon?
Yeah, your primary texts are going to be like, the Conversations with Ogotomeli in English. It was originally called The God of Water in French. Of course, the Pale Fox, and the Urteline and Griole. They have written a number of journal articles and just articles, period, that you can learn. As a matter of fact, if I could share my screen real quick.
Yes, please.
There's this one text that I wanted to highlight. You can read this. Well, not this text here. Let me know when it shows up.
Oh, there we go. Okay, let me remove this.
And you can see my screen. There's a text written in 1954 called African Worlds, Studies in the Cosmological Ideas and the Social Values of Africans. And Marcel Griole and Germaine D'Urteline has a chapter in there called the Dogon. And so it's some good information there. And matter of fact, they highlight in this one, this citation that I have in here, that the Nomo is also the universe itself. And so, when we're dealing with these different so-called deities and things of this nature, there's just different aspects of Amma or whatnot. And, Professor Hunter Adams mentioned one in terms of the Sirius mysteries or whatnot, but you can even, my text, but, I'm taking from these texts, but adding a different context to some of the stuff they talk about. And that is Aluja Volume 2.
Yes.
Chianik to Religion and Philosophy, that came out this year, 2020. And so it's really more so, if you want to get to know about the Dogon, you have to get a hold of those journal articles and things. Of course, the books are great, but one of the things I wish, however, that we had was actually a learned, in the Western sense and in the indigenous sense, of course, elder who has gone through those initiations, who would write about the system themselves, because we always have to interpret through the Europeans, who are documenting certain things, and that's something that I wish we had, and we don't have, that text, other than, for example, when you talk about either Amadou Hapatiba with the Malian Fulanian Bambara tradition, or you're talking about like Malidoma Some with the Daguerre tradition, and also Alexis Tangon with the Daguerre tradition or whatnot. And what is his name? He's an Akan king. And I'm doing the peripherals because, again, as I said, these are interrelated people. So you'll get some insight into the Dogon by studying their cousins, because they're interrelated. And then, of course, that African highway of wisdom, people are traveling, sharing, and getting initiated into these different things. So the closest that you're going to get from an indigenous perspective is these wisdom traditions, or people who have been initiated in these wisdom traditions, who are writing about themselves, but that we have yet to witness from the Dogon themselves. But your primary text is going to be Griole, D'Urteline, all of their articles and chapters and other books, and things that everybody else's kind of interpretations of that data and comparisons with others. So that's what I do. I interpret the data and I compare it with other systems across Africa to give a kind of more coherent and
good holistic point of view.
Go
ahead.
Very quickly, and that is called African Rock Art by David Colson. And that book takes a broad continental view of rock art. There you can begin to see the similarity of signs and symbols across the continent, that those ideas also traveled. And so that's more evidence of this highway of intellectual ideas, where you can see rock art from the Tassili in Morocco, for example. You see some of the same scenes in caves outside of Johannesburg, for example. So that's a very important book. African Rock Art by David Colson.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I add one? And I forgot about this. If somebody in your chat noted this, so thank you to John Diesel Smalls. But there's he passed. It's a text called Philosophy Podium, a Dogon Perspective by Neb Naba Lamusa Mora Denabig. And he's actually a daggerer.
Right.
But again, he's the Dogon is the priesthood, you know, and whatnot.
That's right.
So when you're studying Daguerre, you're also studying a branch of Dogon, and so that's another text that you can get some insights, you know, about the Dogon.
Yeah, you're right. I'm in the process of reading The Spirit of Intimacy by a woman from she's part of the Diagra family.
That's the Sabonfu Some. That was the wife of Malidoma Some. She passed a few years ago.
Yes. This book is excellent too. It's good. Yeah. It's good. Dr. J, what books do you have for us?
Okay. Well, I had been using the Tassili fresco by Henri Lehout, which is no longer in print, but it showed how he went out into the Algeria and those areas of the Sahara area, and he recorded. It's an old book, and it was old images that he was able to photograph. He wanted to go back in more recent time, but the Algerian War would not allow that to take place. And then there's books by Mary Leakey, the wife of Richard Leakey, on the prehistoric art of 40,000 BC in Tanzania, which shows very, very interesting images. Some of them you'll see people floating, many of them as if they're about to take off, but they have a rope around their bodies and holding onto the rope. And she described them as slaves, which I thought was atrocious and terrible, because the thing think they would have been mountain climbers, you know, who sometimes would climb with a rope to pull on each other for safety. So that there again, interpretation is very important in all of these things. And we can't get too caught up on some of that outer space, this, that, and the other, because we want to be like a horse with your blinders on both sides, so you can go straight. And especially the new generation in the computers to guide them toward that. And that certainly was the purpose of initiation. And so we need to have as many rites of passage for our youth, and in the process of these things. God is science. God is science, is in the water, is in the air. When I was talking about the clay jars, I don't remember if I talked about in Kemet, the 3 little jars of Otum. And they rest on 3 wavy lines that represents currents, you know, the currents of water. But then the little jars, it's not clear exactly what's in the jar, whether they are particular unguents or whether it's oil or what kind of oil or whether it's water. We know that I've seen some of those little teeny jars like that at the Brooklyn Museum. And so that another thing I would recommend are the museum catalogs. When the Dogon was at the Brooklyn Museum, they had a catalog. And so too the Metropolitan Museum of Art had a catalog just on the Dogon. Here it is, just on the Dogon. And once again, when you look at this particular image, it's like one that I can hold up. That's right in. It has the beard, had what you just looked at, the catalog. It had a beard of a male and it had female breasts. And so what was that about? It's about HAPI. If you look at the image in Kemet of HAPI in the figurative form, it is both male and female. It's not talking about today's homosexuality or lesbianism or anything. It's saying that there's certain things that are gods that's beyond gender. Beyond gender. The judge is sometimes portrayed throughout West Africa as beyond gender, able to see through the eyes of a male, able to see through the eyes of a female. So that looking at the objects themselves should be a treat for you when these exhibitions come up in the various museums, and they do come up regularly.
Okay. All right. You know, guys, let me tell you. First, let me just thank everybody who is still, the numbers have been going up. I thought it would be going down because we are on the shy of, on the other side of 3 hours, almost 4 hours on StreamYard. Thank you guys. Oh my God. Let me tell you, we love, love, love our Hoppy fans. We love, love, love you guys. Thank you for telling everyone else about it. Thank you for subscribing. Those who are looking at these videos, and we know it's a lot of people looking at these videos, just go ahead and subscribe. But thank you, Professor Adams, for coming, and I will see you on Friday. Asar, I know we're going to be doing something again. It's coming. And thank you so much. And Dr. Jeffries, you did a fabulous job. I'm so happy you said yes. Thank you. All right, guys. So you guys just hang out. I'm going to put you in the green room, and while I bring on our next guest. So, okay, I like this guy. You know what? And I can probably talk like, I don't know, like two more hours about him. But he, oh my. I'm just not going to say anything else. I'm just going to bring him on. He's going to close us out. You guys go to hapifilm.com, but stay tuned. And I'm going to remove myself and put him in. Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.
That was the most extraordinary panel with three just absolute African sacred scientists. HAPI has come along at a time when we are looking for where to go. And HAPI, that film, is giving us a place to look at ourselves through the eyes of our ancestors, based on what the ancestors left for us. We've never lost being African. We've never lost it. And we have to stop saying that. They took everything from us. Actually, they didn't take anything except the way we remembered things. And so I love Dr. Nobles. He said, when you can remember again, you can begin to imagine again. And you learn to remember again by studying your history. History is your yesterday, Dr. Noble says. Today is your miracle, and tomorrow is your mystery. So when you study history, you get rid of the mystery and you can display your miracle. When we look at this HAPI piece, and I want everybody to go to hapifilm.com. I want you to help support this film. I want you to order the DVDs, buy the t-shirts, tell your friends all about it, because it isn't just a documentary. This is a message from the ancestry through those minds that have tried to make themselves the conduits for the message of the ancestors. Listen to Brother Asar. Asar, I haven't spent enough time with you, and even Hunter and I go back forever, and I haven't spent enough time with him. But it's so happy to hear people finally arriving and not being intimidated to say, we are God having a human experience, call us. That's the culture of Africa. Every single African language refer to what we call God as the totality of creation itself. And one of our elders, and I keep forgetting his name, from DC, he says the European sees things in parts and pieces and tried to pull it together. The African sees things as a whole, and we can separate it as we will. And so when we think of HAPI, that river that flowed through ancient Kemet and ancient Kerma, ancient Sudan and Ethiopia, the river was made up, that beautiful, big, flowing, rushing river was made up of a bunch of little pieces. You know, it was made up of the Blue Nile out of Ethiopia. It was made up of the White Nile out of Uganda. It was made up of the tributaries coming from Lake Nyanza. It was made up of tributaries coming from Malawi, coming from the Congo river's overflow. All of those tributaries made up the mighty HAPI. Physically, but metaphorically, what HAPI represented for us is all of the possibilities when we come together, from being the tiny little tributaries to becoming the great one. And we were able to produce an extraordinary economy that produced an extraordinary civilization. But in the process of learning from HAPI and all the things that grew on its banks and all the things that grew in its water, we learned to understand seasonably. HAPI came only at a certain times a year with the black mud that germinate. So we learned to understand that we can look at the stars, we can look at the constellation. We knew when a star was in this position and the constellation was in this position, we can expect HAPI to come with the good black mud that we can grow out of. So in studying astronomy, we learned to create an explanation for the masses called astrology, to explain the science of astronomy that the masses didn't have time to do. Those who were the priests or the scientists did those things. Because we really didn't call ourselves priests, by the way. The best thing to describe what we call our people was scientists, because that's what they were doing. And so what this HAPI film needs from our people is to kind of study it and relax, to build that enormous history with all of those extraordinary monuments. And let's stop calling our universities temples, because they weren't temples. They were places of learning and carrying out intergenerational transmission of the wisdom of the ancestors. Today, we call those things universities. So if we want to call them anything, let's start calling them universities and not temples. They were not primarily places of worship, though they had within them spaces for worship, you know? And so as we began to watch this film and understand all of the pieces and all of the extraordinary scholars that's involved from different disciplines, and we are trying to bring it all together to create that African oneness that you can understand the parts, like the sun. You know, the sun gives off all of these beams. Every sunlight is a beam, but it's also particles. And yet each one of those beams contain the totality of the essence of that sun itself. So we, the humans, we are, when the first African human being came into being, it was a manifestation of the universe expressing itself as human. And each one of us is like that sunlight, that beam that Akhenaten is talking about that people so misunderstand. Each one of us go back to our original ancestral source, which is the divine itself. None of us is a piece of life. We don't live and we die. We give birth to ourselves as our children, as we were given birth to by our parents. When they gave birth to us, they gave birth to themselves. That continuum going forward is our eternity. That continuum going backwards lead us to divinity. And so HAPI is an extraordinary piece. It's not just about economics. It's not just about history. It's not just about agriculture. It's not just about science. It's saying that our ancestors had, I heard both Asar and Sister Jeffries and Brother Hunter describing this African wholeness. You know, the Ewe people of Togo and Ghana, they refer to the concept as Sogbelisa. The totality of creation itself is divinity. And we are all expressions of aspects of that divine essence having our peculiar experience. The butterfly, the tree, has no less or no greater worth or value or purpose than you. And you have no greater worth or value or purpose than them. And when we understand this, that the only thing that exists is divinity itself, which the brother was explaining beautifully on how the Dogon expressed that and how Congo expresses that. If we can come back to that just in its generality, we can begin to solve our economic problems in America. The violence everybody's talking about in America, if you really understand HAPI and you really study what that river, which is not something, an anomaly on the side. Remember, the river is a part of God itself. The way it functions is a part of God itself. You know, when we are born, the man and the woman come together, they have sex, they make love, they produce a seed which becomes a child. That is the only way God creates human. We are that aspect of God that creates human. So we're not something separate from God, nor do we function as some anomaly on our own. We are a function of God. And I think HAPI will help us arrive there. If we look at all of its pieces, all of the tributaries, each one of the scholars represent a tributary. In the same way, each one of those bodies of water represents a tributary. And when we look at how we can define and use it today, in all of our communities, Black banks, Black credit unions, Black real estate firms, Black hair parlor, Black barbershops, Black churches, Black mosques, each of them represent a tributary. If they follow the principles of HAPI, those tributaries will come together and create that enormous, powerful, gorgeous river that will bring us the fertility necessary to rebuild our civilization. That's the concept. So go to hapifilm.com, buy the video, give it as a gift to a friend, give it as a birthday gift to a friend. Make sure that somebody else have access to this body of knowledge that you have access to. And the HAPI River, we used it, but we could have used the Senegalese River. We could have used the Congo River. We could have used the Niger River because they all did the same thing. The laws of nature doesn't change no matter what part of the world you're in or who you are in that part of the world. The ecology that is present will determine what symbols you use to tell the story of divinity. But the story of divinity is the same all over the world. You know, in the desert, we may need one set of tools to explain love. Well, we can't use the tools in the rainforest that we use in the desert to explain love, but we will still be explaining love. So I'm sorry, I didn't turn that phone off. I forgot. I usually don't. So the film HAPI is a story being told in metaphor by a group of extraordinary scholars about a message that nature left us as a message from our ancestors. And in that message that nature left us, we can learn the whole story of the universe. Even if we never read a book, because the man who lived in Zululand didn't have a clue what his brother was doing in Dogon land, who didn't have any idea what they were doing in Madagascar. What they did have is the same universe to respond to, and what they were, an aspect of that universe making the response. And so each of us became tributaries. At the same time, each of us became a beam of that great light that distributed smaller lights of itself, but each light containing the totality of the possibility of the totality itself. That's what white folks are trying to get to with this theory of one. They're trying to figure our thing out, but they don't have the capacity to hold spirit. They can understand the physical thing, they can understand the intellectual thing, you know, they can deal with body, and they can even deal with their notion of soul. But they don't have the genetic capacity to contain spirit. Now, I have to go back and let Dr. Welton come in and talk about melanin and Dr. Richard King and what that all means in terms of the ability to contain spirit. That vibratory energy that connects you back to the universe. So the Dogon didn't need a telescope because it is Sirius. They were a part of that star. That star is a part of them. HAPI is going to open up a whole bunch of possibilities as we look at today's world and says, okay, how do we transform Detroit? How do we transform LA? You know, how do we transform New York into the kind of civilization with the ethical moral principle based on Ma'at, so that we can go forward and thrive instead of constantly having this dialogue with racism and so-called white supremacists about letting me into your putrid deadness, letting me, please, allow me to become a part of your criminality as of reality. No. How can the worthy fit into the unworthy? But I'm not even go there. That's my theological stuff. Let's come back to HAPI. HAPI, the film, is trying to show us in a new metaphor how to look at history and how to look at nature and how to look at our ancestors' relationship with that aspect of being called nature and how they came together in a partnership and produced a civilization that lasted for thousands and thousands of years. So how do we create our HAPI in Chicago, in Detroit, in New York, in Memphis? We have to find the streams in the Black community that by themselves, the church will go nowhere except a good sermon and to make you feel good, and maybe some people be psychologically well for a few days. The Black business that's only making money to buy their one little house in the white neighborhood and send their kids off to college and gonna go nowhere. But that same little pretty girl in college or handsome boy gonna meet my hoodie children, and that's gonna be that. It's gonna be a wrap. So let's look and see. What are we talking about? What is HAPI trying to tell us to do? It said, look at all the streams in the Black community that have not configured themselves into one mighty HAPI. And let's use the metaphor from history to bring all of those streams, the revenue streams, the intellectual streams, the financial streams, the technical streams together into one HAPI presentation, so that the millions and millions or billions we have in white banks go into Black banks. The billions and billions we have in the white banks go into Black credit unions. so that the millions we're spending to build house in high-class, upper-class white neighborhoods come into our neighborhood, like an East St. Louis, which is sitting there like a desert, just waiting for the happy river of Black economics, which we have, to flow into East St. Louis, buy up that land and create a Black heaven out of it for our people. That's what HAPI is trying to talk about. The violence we see in the street has nothing to do with guns. The violence we see in the street has to do with ignorance. The violence we see in the street has to do with miseducation. The violence we see in the street has to do with the attack on the psyche of African children by white people and Black people who are white people in blackface running these educational institutions, that instead of producing a living human being with ethical, moral, principle, concepts, and ideas based on love of self, based on self-value and self-worth, they produce a self-loathing, self-hating, hopeless being, ill-equipped to function in the society they've created economically. And what are they left to do but act out violently? Education and theology is at the foundation of the violence in the Black community, not guns. We had guns long before now, and we didn't go around shooting each other down like dogs. In the last 30 years, we've killed 300,000 other African Americans with guns because the mind that the white education system has produced is a putrid, sick, diseased mind in a Black body designed only for self-destruction. And the theology hasn't offered any escape routes. But listen to HAPI and study how that river produced the theology that says I came into existence so that existence might exist. And when I realized that I existed, my aunt was at my side, and that was Amun speaking in the pyramid text. That I can spit out Shu and cough up the female counterpart Tef Nut, that I can create Geb and create a counterpart called Nut, and then I can create Asar and created a counterpart, because everything we created was matched, male and female. No androgynism in nature. Dr. Ben called it the laws of opposites. You know? And so what we need to really, really do is just study this piece. This HAPI thing that's 5 years in the making, with all of these beautiful brothers and sisters trying to tell our story, is a message from the ancestors, and we are mere conduits in the telling of that story. So go to hapifilm.com, where you can get your tickets, where you can get your gear, where you can find out, like they said, more about the HAPI documentary, and just learn the literature that you were given tonight, those documents and those books that you were given to read. You know, you'll see that same spirit of divinity manifest not only all over Africa, because we have to stop stopping our beingness at the borders of Africa, because we inhabited the entire earth before anybody else did. From Australia to South America to North America to India, even Europe, before anybody else who can call themselves other than African. And all our shades of brown ain't nothing but shades of black. The blackest black is the source of it all. And so follow HAPI, follow the river, learn the story of the ancestors, how we came from not knowing how to provide food, clothing, shelter, and safety, to studying nature and partnering with nature and learning about cosmology and matching it with ecology, so that we produce abundance of food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security for ourselves and our family. Because that's the motivator for right now. It was always the only and the primary motivation for human existence. How do I provide food, clothing, shelter, safety? You say, I went to college to be a doctor. I went to college to be a lawyer. Yes, all that may be true, but you wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer to make money, to provide food, clothing, shelter, and safety. So bring it back to basic. What is your motivation? What is your purpose? And in doing so, our ancestors have left us an ethical, moral pathway and ladder to perfecting ourselves as an aspect of the divine itself. So that when we express ourselves, and I think Asar was saying, we express ourselves in the way the divinity expressed itself. That we develop all those qualities and attributes in ourselves. It's like in the Yoruba system. They talk about all these orishas. The orishas are nothing but quality and attributes of the divinity. In Kemet, they talk about the different, what do we call it in Kemet? That's when I'm going too fast. The netters. The netters are nothing but qualities and attributes discerned by the mind of your ancestors of the divine itself. The loas in voodoo, the same system. Different language, different ecology, different location being discovered at a different time in history. But it's about the loas are nothing more than the quality and attributes of the divinity, the totality of everything that our ancestors were able to discern. In the Akan, they were talking about the Obosum. The Obosum are the same thing. That system exists in every African community in the world. They saw a whole, and then they were able to recognize its parts and its function. Europeans see the parts and trying to figure out how to make it a whole. That's why he's got a problem. And we're caught up in that problem because we no longer see the whole and understand its giving of its parts. So I think HAPI will help us come back to that, to see that that major HAPI river, when we follow it back down into Southern Africa, we see all of the parts that make up tributaries that created this enormous roaring river, bringing all of that silt and fertilization, producing all that possibility for food, so animals and plants can all live off of each other, and we could live off of them, and yet maintain harmony and balance among them, so that we didn't even genocide the plants, we didn't genocide the fish, we didn't genocide the animals, because we understood there was a partnership in nature that had to work on the harmony and balance we call ma'at, truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, balance, and reciprocity. So that's HAPI. So Felicia, I don't know what else you want me to do, except to say HAPI is an opportunity to walk with your ancestors. And you don't have to know the name of the ancestor, really, because all ancestors are our ancestors.
No, I think you said it all, Professor Small. Thank you.
You're welcome, my dear Felicia.
Oh, and thank everybody. And next week we have a really exciting HAPI Talks. We'll probably let everybody know about it tomorrow. It's really good, so please stay tuned next Thursday. Other than that, you guys, happy family, have a good night. All right, peace.
Peace and blessings.